how did that transition from being fight winning streak and then all of a sudden, I guess you could say quote unquote like downfall?
There was a lot of factors that went into, you know, her run in Ascension and then her last two fights.
But no, she has full mount, now ground and pound, and Tate gives up her back.
Looking for the arm again for a second there.
And she was a world beater.
By Rhonda, and a big throwdown. Can she do it right here?
Take the skills she learned in Judo and adapt them to MMA at a time where, you know, no one possessed those unique skills.
You said that BJJ was just a rebrand of Judo.
I would say Judo, the philosophies of, you know, takedowns in a gi and submissions and guard passing and pinning are all in Judo. The International Judo Federation has kind of stripped away a lot of those aspects to sportify a martial art. All those kind of like make it different than jiu-jitsu, where jiu-jitsu is like the long form conversation of these exchanges, where in judo it's a little bit of a short duration. Probably one of our best athletes heading into the Olympics is a gentleman who was named Jack Hatton, and he was the #1 athlete in the US for that quad, and he was, you know, top 10, top 12 ranked athlete in the world rankings. And within the quad, at the end of 2019,
Justin JFlow Flores, man. I've been following you for a while, you know, with your Instagram and just the way you do judo. It's just very flowy and very, very fun. But what I want to get to first, I was doing some research on, I think, on you and Vinny Vagdalez. And then when I was doing research on you guys before I do these podcasts, I'm like blown away by the resume because you guys, obviously it's different. Vinny got into a different, you know, he was a professional fighter, and then you're doing this, but then the accolades just stack on top of each other. I was so overwhelmed when I was looking at it. But what I wanted to tell you, man, can you talk about coaching the Olympics? Because I think that right there, if I were to ever coach the Olympics or compete in the Olympics, that's pretty much life. Like, I think I've done it all. That's the most sought after, I think, more than like a championship ring, you know, in basketball. Can you talk about like coaching that and competing in the trials, but first coaching it in the 2020 year of 2020? Yeah.
So technically it was the 2021 Olympics because of COVID. So everything got pushed back a year. And, you know, if I'm going to start at the beginning, as a competitor, I was a martial artist from a young age in the sport of judo. And that discipline kind of shaped my personality in a very unique way, more so than I would say a wrestler, just by the fact of that it's a very mutually beneficial martial art where there's respect for your partner opponent in a way where you bow to each other and you show discipline in a little bit different and less gritty of a way than a lot of other combat sports. So within the sphere of judo, my brother and I trained together every day for, you know, decades. And as a competitor, although I did reach a lot of milestones, I never really truly met my potential as an athlete. I ran into a lot of injuries and setbacks, and in the sport of judo, I had a few unique moments that really did kind of prevent me from reaching the status of being an Olympian as far as me as a competitor. So when I kind of put my gi down in a way and entered into capitalism for the first time as a 28-year-old, I really did think my time on the mat was finished as far as like coaching or competing or just being involved, just because I was a little disappointed at the way things ended as an athlete. So it wasn't till sometime later that I kind of found my way back into the sport of judo, maybe 4 or 5 years later, and started coaching for Team USA. And it wasn't without the purpose of becoming an Olympic coach. It was more of a cathartic, I wanted to find my way back into judo in a way that gave me a sense of ease, because when I was a competitor, I feel like I was really disappointed in the outcome of how I ended things because I had blinders on. I was wanting to be an Olympian so bad for almost 2 decades.
That was the main goal.
That was the main goal.
Like the ultimate tunnel vision goal that you had.
For sure. And it seems a little bit, I don't know, singular, because there was a lot of milestones I was able to reach within the journey of being an athlete. But it was all with the purpose of becoming an Olympian myself. And I was kind of embittered, and I really looked at the sport of judo as kind of a negative endeavor when I was coaching. And then when I got back into coaching, I was able to kind of rewire my brain a little bit as far as, what I thought was important about the sport itself rather than the end goal of just winning. Because it is pretty binary in the sport of judo and a lot of combat sports. You either win or you lose. I think that I was able to kind of become a little bit more well-rounded of a human when I started coaching others. And I had a little bit more perspective. I was 4 years off the mat completely. So I think I was able to see athletes as unique specimens in their own right, rather than this is how I would do it, and kind of being ego-driven in a way where I saw exchanges on the mat through only my lens of how I would have done things, where I was able to kind of maybe be a little bit more open-minded and treat every athlete individually, even though it is an individual sport, but it was the team of Team USA Judo I was coaching. So once I kind of reached into the level of 2017, 2018, 2019, I was the head coach for the US World Team in each one of those years, where they were in Baku, Azerbaijan, Budapest, Hungary, and Tokyo, Japan. COVID happened. Yep. So it was a very tough time for just the world. But also in judo, it became a very strange thing where they were really limiting the credentials given to the coaches and all of the second and third tier people involved in the Olympics to go to Tokyo. So initially, which is a strange thing, and I don't really want to make this like a negative thing, but it's what happened. The people that were running USA Judo gave me a call and they're like, hey, we don't have enough credentials for you to go as far as being the coach of the US team.
What's going on, guys? If you're enjoying this podcast, please don't forget to like the videos and subscribe to the channel. Only if you're getting value out of it on YouTube, and also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to leave a rating and follow. And also, I also write a blog newsletter from what I learned from my incredible guests that I have on. So sign up for the email list and get updates on the podcast. Thank you for your love and support. Now back to the show. When you say credentials, can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So to be able to be in the Olympic Village and coach mat side and be involved in the Team USA sphere, you have to be like a credentialed person that goes through Safe Sport, that goes through all these checklists of things that you could just be a part of Team USA. And so they were limiting that just based on COVID. So there was also another coach for Team USA who, by my standards was not really a coach. He was more of a team manager. And so, it was always my endeavor after not making it to the Olympics as an athlete to kind of be able to justify my whole pursuit of being a combat athlete to at least go as a coach. And I know I look at that as kind of an ego-driven endeavor, but it was something that I really put value in. And I did have a son, and I did take time away from, all the things that I could have been doing raising him. And now I'm raising other people's kids, traveling all over the world on the judo circuit. So I invested a lot in it, and time and energy. I was running practices, camps. I had athletes come out here to San Diego from the Team USA Judo team. I was helping with weight cuts. I was scouting other athletes for matches. I was doing everything I could to be the best coach I could be. And it kind of got taken away from me about 8 months away from the Olympics, because there was just not enough credentials, enough like, here you go, you're part of the team. I got a call from one of the team leader for USA Judo, and they gave me that news, and it was a real bummer, man. So it wasn't until, a few months later where if we didn't have enough qualifiers to be on Team USA during the Olympics, I wasn't going to get to go. So it wasn't by happenstance that at the World Championships about 4 months before the Olympics, we ended up getting 2 more qualifiers. So I was brought in as a coach. So I got to go to the Olympics as a coach, which was really cathartic. I had a lot of kind of resentment towards the sport about a decade prior, and I was able to kind of become whole, if you know what I'm saying, where, it kind of filled my cup, and I was able to kind of be okay with my journey as a judoka, because so much stock was put into me attaining my goal. And I know it's just like a benchmark, the Olympics. And a lot of people that are not really in the know of judo just only know that, the Olympics. Mm-hmm. So, I had won numerous national titles. I had been in the top 10 at the World Championships. I had accomplished a lot of things, but I just never was that one thing. And I felt like just to rationalize my existence, it was really important for me to attain that. As far as I wanted to help the athletes, of course, and that's first and foremost, but for my own goals, just, as like a notch in my belt and something that I could kind of sit back and be like, I did it. I was able to go as one of 2 coaches, and I made the most of it. I really did embrace the role, and I felt really just satisfied after the Olympics, even though our team, was a smaller team because of the qualifications is really difficult. You have to be in the top 16 in your weight division for each weight class to be qualifying for the Olympic Games in your weight class. So we had 4 qualifiers out of 14 weight divisions. Oh, wow. So it was a small team of 4 great athletes, though. Yep. And we were there for the 2 weeks in Tokyo.
So when you were coaching, I know it seems, like you said, ego-driven, self-centered a little bit, but how much were you thinking about just being in there? Did that distract you at all when you were coaching because you wanted to be in there so bad? It was your ultimate goal, right? To be in there. And I know how it feels. We all have that. So, I'm pretty sure a lot of people empathize with that. But were you I know you were obviously focused on your athletes, but then how much of a distraction did that have on you, or were you just all in when you were all in on it?
As far as the pageantry of the Olympics and how much, it's every quadrennial, it's every 4 years. So, and it's put up on this pedestal as though it's, it is the premier event for most amateur and pro sports on planet Earth.
Oh, yeah.
I really didn't feel that same kind of pressure of the hoopla for a few reasons. I think one, most importantly, it was the COVID Olympics. There was no fans. So right. We competed in basically an empty arena.
It was like the NBA bubble, yes. Right? No fans. They just had screens. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like...
It was different.
Surreal. Mm-hmm. The energy of, most... judo in Japan for the Olympics, I can't even put into words how that would have been. Because, it sold out in an hour, all the seats.
And this was the pre-sale tickets. Sorry to cut you off, but then the pre-sale wasn't when COVID was happening, and then it went into COVID all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
Just to make it clear for people,
because it was in 2019 the sales went on for the seats at all the venues, but it wasn't till the beginning of 2020 where everything shut down, and then they had to reevaluate whether the Olympics were even going to happen. A lot of sponsors pulled out. And it did show when we were at the Olympics, as far as the Olympic Village didn't have the same kind of mystique or vibes that it normally does. We had to kind of censor ourselves as far as where we were heading and who we hung out with and what buildings we were at. And it really did kind of made sure we compartmentalized ourselves from, other teams, and we had to have masks on, and we couldn't really move around freely the same way. We had to stay within the village, quarantined, and all we could do is go to our venue for training or go to our venue for the competition. So it really did limit the experiences, but I made the most of it. I really did enjoy the experience, and coaching the athletes, scouting the athletes of the competitors that my athletes were competing against was great, and doing all those normal things that you set yourself up for success in small bites to lead towards those matches. Running practices, helping with weight cuts, just getting your athletes prepared mentally was just all the things that I really do enjoy as a coach.
Yes.
Being involved in every step of the way. So I really did enjoy that process. And it goes without saying, and I have to mention this, that probably one of our best athletes heading into the Olympics is a gentleman who was named Jack Hatton. He competed. I've known him since he was about 8 years old. We were at the same judo club in New York where I was finishing my career at when he was just starting. And he was the #1 athlete in the US for that quad. And he was, top 10, top 12 ranked athlete in the world rankings. And within the quad, at the end of 2019, he committed suicide. And he was someone that I'd known forever. I'd coached him in 4 continents, in 50 matches around the world. Mat side, helped him with weight cuts, been involved in his career for those last 3 years. And it was just a shock to my system. I actually found out about it when I was training someone right here. I got a call from the CEO of USA Judo, and that never happened. So I saw my phone light up, and I answered the phone, and it just took me by storm. Wow. It was really a blow to just USA Judo, his family, all of his friends, his coaches back home, myself. So there was definitely a mourning period. And, heading into the Olympics, it was just something that I held really close to me. And, he came here to train for about a week, maybe 3 or 4 months before he committed suicide. And I remember the last day before he left to go, back to his hometown to train in Boston. We had a barbecue in my backyard here, and there was 4 other athletes with us and my brother and a couple others. And, we were having a good time, and we had a couple beers, and, we didn't want to drink too much. I think I had a beer or 2, and same with him. And we had 2 more Modelo's, and we agreed not to drink them because, he's in the midst of his camp, and I don't like drinking any more than 1 or 2 drinks. Mm-hmm. And we said we would shelf them, and I'd put them in the fridge until we were in Tokyo. And after he competed, we would celebrate by drinking them. And I remember the morning I got the call, I drank one of them and just kind of mourned, and I left the other one in the fridge right here for about 18 months. And then I brought it with me to Tokyo. And after his day of competition, the 81 kilogram weight class, I drank it on my balcony in the Olympic Village and had a good cry, just as far as like being overwhelmed by just the grief and, knowing that he would have been there to fulfill his dreams. And, no one really knows why as far as what was going on with him. But
what's going on, guys? Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I hope that you're getting a lot of value out of it. Just a quick announcement. I started a YouTube and Patreon membership for you Speakeasy Squad listeners out there. So for YouTube, just click down below to join. And also for Patreon, I'll post a link down below so that you could join for you Spotify and Apple podcast listeners out there. What you get is behind the scene footage and early access to podcasts, some pictures, photos, and whatever behind the scenes shoots that we do. So click the links down below, and all the proceeds, actually all of it goes into this podcast. So to enhance productions, to get bigger guests on, all of it. So thank you for your love and support. And now back to the show. I was going to say, were there any signs that, maybe he might have been depressed before that occurrence? Like was he going through any like panic attacks, any,
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, there's nothing concrete. I mean, yeah, I know his dad really well, and we've talked about it a lot, but I'd been with him a lot, and there was a few weight cuts I was with him, and he used to have to lose a lot of weight before his competitions to make 81 kilos. And I remember one of them specifically in Morocco where he kind of did have a panic attack. It was in but that's like under such like harsh circumstances. So it's really hard to extrapolate whether that was, you know, something else or just the fact that he was super dehydrated. But I've had I had a lot of conversations with them all over the world after competitions and before competitions. And, you know, he was struggling with some things that were, you know, family related, but nothing to the degree that I really felt any kind of something is that dark.
Yeah.
And, you know, his signature is right there on that wall. And he seemed, you know, one of the happiest people that, you know, would crack jokes all the time and keep things light. And, you know, it did come out of left field. And it's just something I'll always take with me through my, you know, coaching career and, you know, try and really value relationships that I have and try and see things like this coming in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, after that must have been not only hard, but pretty traumatizing for you at that time. And I wanted to go back and thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Because that's a big one that, you know, I personally, obviously, I've grieved with family members, but not to that extent of suicide and just happening all of a sudden. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of take it back to your history. I know you started judo at the age of 8.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How did that start your legacy? As in, did your parents get you into it? I know your dad was a martial artist.
Yeah.
Did he give you that path of judo, or did you choose it instead of like BJJ, boxing? You know, there's all these combat sports, and judo is one of those things where it's like, I'm not going to say like people are trying to avoid it, but it seems like you're getting slammed on the ground, like outside looking in, right? You're getting slammed on the ground. It just seems so, I guess you could say, vicious from, again, outside looking in. It's like, oh man, you're getting thrown on your head, right? So what was the thought process on that? Like, especially at that early age, were you the one to decide? And then you were like, oh, I really love this. You know, like most people go to jiu-jitsu, they get addicted to it. They're like, oh, mom, I love this. Or did your like family or dad kind of be like, okay, this is the path that you need to go?
Yeah, it was definitely the latter. My father is a black belt in, I think, 8 martial arts disciplines, mostly, you know, traditional.
Yes.
But he had trained judo for, you know, he was a black belt and a national level player back in the 70s and early 80s. And when he had my sister, my brother, and myself, he was involved in, you know, at the time, Gene LaBelle was one of his senseis, and he's, you know, a famous martial artist. And he got my dad into being an extra and a stuntman in a lot of movies and TV shows. So my dad was, you know, trying to make a living in that realm before he had his kids, us. And it's kind of funny because, you know, a long time ago, I found in a drawer a bunch of headshots and pictures of my dad, you know, dressed up as an Indian on a horse or wearing a suit, and all these different like roles that he was trying to, you know, make that Hollywood life, because he lived in Los Angeles and that's where I grew up. Nice. And when that kind of wasn't paying all the bills and we were starting to, you know, grow up, he kind of pivoted to go to medical school. So he got his undergrad at USC and then went to medical school down here in UCSD. And I was about 5 years old when we moved here to San Diego. And I hadn't started judo at that point, but when we moved down here, we started getting involved in gymnastics. And then we got onto a jump roping team. It's called the San Diego Sand Skippers, which is like a funny, you know, like way to start my kind of like athletic endeavors in gymnastics and jump roping. Very, you know, I don't know, niche sports to say the least. And
I'd say that's micro niche.
Micro niche,
very
for sure.
Micro.
Yeah.
Jump rope.
I was like traveling around, doing demonstrations around at, you know, SeaWorld or different malls and doing competitions in jump roping. And it did build like really good stamina, coordination, proprioception, balance, those 2 disciplines.
I bet.
And I think I was 8 years old when my dad was like, okay, it's time. It's like that scene, I don't know if you've seen this meme of like Malcolm in the Middle, where he's talking to Malcolm, Heisenberg's talking to Malcolm, and he's saying, It's about hockey, I think. And his son offhandedly says, I think I want to play hockey. And then all the lights dim and there's a spotlight on him and his son. He's like, once you choose this path, there's no going back.
Yeah.
And it was very similar where when we started judo, it was a very, formulaic, systematic, very, structured path. And there was no going back. And I think from age 8 to 28, I competed in 4,000 matches in judo, possibly.
Sheesh.
So me and my brother and my sister for a while.
Did you enjoy it?
So that's the thing. I really didn't have a choice.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
it wasn't something that I saw on TV or that I strive to go do on my own. But as I started doing it more and more, I found more value in it and more independence as far as like identity and personality as a judoka. And it's an interesting thing because my brother, who was very instrumental in my development, he was way more talented than me as a judoka. Just more, I don't know, he had the God-given talent. He was able to kind of see things and do them, where I had to really train hard and figure it out and put in like the 10,000 hours. And my brother was more just able to figure things out. He was highly intelligent, and it was like he would attack 1 time to every 10 times that I would need to attack to accomplish something, where he could kind of feel his way into a perfect uchimata or a throw or a technique that would take me a long time to really master. So I was always kind of chasing after my brother as far as being able to beat him or match his persona on the mat. So I was really motivated by my brother and his talent. And it's something, I remember to this day where he would go out there and it was just like music was playing, just the way he would able to operate. And he would be nervous in a way where he was calm before his matches, where I would try and get like really fired up and slap myself on the face and get like pumped up. Where he would want to be really relaxed. And that's something as I grew older that I was able to utilize for my own style. Rather than, fight grit with grit, I would have to, almost like embody calmness to go out and have my best performances rather than like run in the red.
Yep.
And I think I've taken that with me as a 45-year-old grappler now, where when I engage in combat, whether it's jiu-jitsu, judo, or wrestling, I try and be really still and calm and weather storms rather than be the storm. So I think that was one of the most important concepts as an adult grappler that I was able to kind of utilize from my brother, where he never really had to get pumped up. He would be more like, hey, let's like calm down.
Yeah.
And as a youngster, I was pretty like hyperactive. I was bouncing off the walls in my matches at home, in training. And it did like kind of like gel with my personality. And it wasn't till, after I was done competing that I was able to kind of understand that headspace that my brother kind of was able to embody on the mat and off the mat, because he was just a little bit more mature than I was, where I had the blinders on. I wanted to win and I would do anything it took to win. Training wise, I overtrained all the time. I injured myself because of that. And it kind of like made me have to rethink my own, plight in my journey as a martial artist. Because, competition is one thing. And, the rule set for judo is more like go, sense of urgency, who's first usually wins. Where, in jiu-jitsu and other disciplines, you could kind of take the inverse of that. You could counter, you could re-attack, you could use a lot of things. And you could use that in judo for sure, and in wrestling. But it's not like the meta. It's not like the way to get ahead quicker. So, I ran into a lot of injuries because of my style, where I was going for broke a lot. Right. I was taking myself and putting myself in dangerous positions a lot. I was trying to explode rather than go around. So, I've almost lived a lot of lives as a grappler, where I've had to like take on different personas because of injuries or, different headspaces I'm at as an adult or as a parent. and understanding, let's not take this path because there's, a cliff. Let's take this path because there's a bridge. And before it was like, I don't care what path, I'm going to do whatever it takes to win.
Do you think that's what till now, that's what made you great though, is to be able to go, it's almost like a car crash every time, right? But there's something to that. A lot of people, I would call that tenacity and relentlessness, kind of like a Jordan Colby.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't, excuse my French, but I don't give a shit. Let's just go, go, go.
Yeah.
I mean, and then it's almost like a natural progression to where you were younger then, and then that was your style. And then you kind of had like your brother, kind of mentoring you passively or actively to be able to like, okay, we're, like, let's have a balance here with the car crashes that you're going along and, going off the cliff a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that's what I'm getting off of it.
Yeah.
It's like all the stuff that I see, on Instagram and how you branded your business. Now I know that stems from that. I mean, that has a lot to do. What if you were more of a calmer fighter? Would have things ended up this way, as successful, with your gyms now and all that, right? Like that's what made you you.
Yeah. No. I definitely value all the setbacks and everything I accomplished. It fits into that algorithm, and the output is who I am now. And I have a lot of, I think I have a lot of things to owe the journey. But if I am asked if I would have done it differently, for sure, I would have done a lot of things differently. And it's not mean I'd live in regret. I just think that there's ways I could have gone about being a healthier athlete than I did, for sure. The way I cut weight, the way I lived a little bit recklessly in my early 20s. And, I was able to kind of rectify one of my burnt bridges just recently that I felt that, in my late teens, early 20s, I was a Division I wrestler for the University of Nebraska. And I was a highly talented wrestler. I'm not
Division I Nebraska.
I'm not bragging, but I was a much better judoka. And wrestling was a side quest. And I was only a wrestler because my brother was the number one Olympic judo athlete in his weight class. And I was the number 2 Olympic judoka in my weight class. And I could no longer really make my weight, 60 kilos, 132 pounds. And my brother was the number 1 145 pounder in 1998. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall where I'm not going to be able to beat my brother for the 2000 Olympic team. And I can't make this weight class anymore. Wow. Where I would have been destined for that 2000 Olympic slot. And I actually beat the guy who made it and ended up taking 9th place. But I had all this skill in judo and I kind of shelved it because I saw, hey, I could do this thing for 3 or 4 years and get my college paid for. And at that time, for lack of a better word, I was a blue chip athlete where I was one of the top recruits in the country for my weight class. And so I decided to go wrestle for the University of Nebraska on scholarship. Some things happened leading up to 2000 where my brother, he just grew out of that weight class, just like I was growing out of the weight class below me. And as a 17-year-old, he was cutting to make 145 pounds. And as a 21-year-old, he was still cutting to make that same weight class. And everyone knows within 17 and 21, you grow, you get bigger. And he couldn't move up a weight class because he was already locked into being the best athlete in America in that weight class. So he missed weight at the most important event that was the prelude to the Olympics. So he no longer was the Olympian at that weight class because he missed weight. So it kind of like was a tragic event in our family and for him. And it really did suck. And I was having a really hard time at Nebraska at that same time. We had a coaching change. The coaches that recruited me got fired. And they brought in a new crop of coaches that I just didn't know. And it's not to their, it wasn't their fault. I was really comfortable with the staff that had recruited me to go there. And I felt like I was missing out on my window to be the best judoka in the world I could be. At that time, I'd beaten the number 1 athlete in the world from Cuba, Ioannis Arancibia. I'd beaten Udi Box, who took 3rd at the Worlds. I'd beaten like 5 of the top 10 players who now were the best. And I felt like it was just my time to leave wrestling. And I did that in a way where I wasn't proud of. It was the night before we were wrestling Iowa State. and I had some nagging injuries, and it was a snowstorm, and I was homesick, and it was just all these things kind of compiled into me in a fleeting moment, being like, you know what, I'm out. I packed up my truck and I drove to San Diego from Lincoln, and I only told our team captain, Brian Snyder, who's now the assistant coach there. And I turned my back and I closed the book on that era of my life. I was there for 2.5 years, and I really did like it there in Lincoln. And, you know, all the things that I'd accomplished there, I felt like I can't even like look back happily on. I just am embittered in just the way I did it. In a way I should have explained to my coach, Mark Manning, you know, how I was feeling and the troubles I was having. My parents were getting divorced at that time, and just a lot of things kind of converged in that decision without being able to be articulated at the time. I was a 19-year-old, 20-year-old. So I finally went back after 25 years this last weekend with my son.
Wow.
And it was amazing. It was like very similar to when I went and coached the Olympic team, where I felt like I could put a stamp of approval on that era of my life just by getting closure and, you know, unburning that bridge. And, you know, to me, I'm probably just a blip on the radar of Mark Manning, who's been there for 25 years. Coach Jordan Burroughs, the team is ranked number 2 in the country. And, you know, it's a very sought after university to go wrestle for. And it was when I was there too. And I went into the wrestling room. I had that conversation with Mark Manning. I saw the assistant coach, Brian Snyder, who I hadn't seen in 2 decades, and a host of other athletes that I wrestled with 25 years later. And we were able to walk out onto the mat preceding the dual meet. And there was, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 spectators there, you know, doing the clap with the, you know, the song that the Bulls come out to. That's the same song that we would come out to before our wrestling meets. And it was like where nostalgia meets just like pure joy. And it was just amazing, where I felt like I time traveled back to where I was just a young wrestler, and there was just, you know, something to behold for me as far as like my own journey, that I could finally like look at that time that I was there as something that was super positive. Because I always kind of like, whenever people would talk to me about wrestling at Nebraska, I would kind of like, yeah, we're going to move on from that. But now I could kind of look at it with, you know, rose-colored glasses again, and see myself as like, you know, I did that. I was part of that team and that network and that family of, you know, high-level wrestlers that, you know, it's just something that I really am happy I did. And I brought my son, and he was able to see the spectacle of, you know, how big of a deal it is. The wrestling dual meet between Nebraska and Army just kind of typified that. It showed, you know, that the number 23 team got blitzed 36-3 by Nebraska. And that was like something that I'm like, this was my weight class, 141. And he saw like the defending national champion wrestle at that weight class and the weight class above, 149. And it was like, wow, you did that, Dad? Like, it was like, yeah, because my son's amazing. 8, and it's hard for him to kind of like, no, I'm sure he's come in here and I've been training Patty Pimblett or Dominic Cruz or Rhonda, and he's like, oh, it's just, you know, there they are. He doesn't understand what a big deal it is that these like world-class athletes are just here in the garage training with me, you know? So he's starting to get an understanding of the bigger picture and the broader scope of things, which I really do want to like, you know, impart upon him. And now he's starting judo, and he can see like the forest from the trees, where his journey, you know, can be met with like greatness in the future if he chooses this path. Sure. I'm not going to force it upon him.
Well, you know, hindsight's always 20/20, right?
Yeah.
So what you're doing for him is just priceless. It's unbelievable, because when he grows up and starts realizing like, oh my goodness, you know, what he's going to look back on it. And then, like you said, we got Rhonda here, Patty Template, and my dad was just a straight badass. Especially taking him, I mean, I know those are big names, but to me, what stuck out is taking him to Nebraska and then showing him the experiences of what his dad actually did, because you're leading by behavior, an example, right? It's not just like, oh, son, I wish I could have done that. No, it's like, wait a minute, you were a Division I wrestler. I mean, from outside, look, to me, that's amazing, you know? And then again, going back to it, it also solidified what you are now, which we're going to talk about, meaning like, okay, you're wrestling and then jiu-jitsu, obviously we're going to talk about that. You training in 540 and what was funny, and we'll lead into that segment.
Yeah. Sure.
So we'll get into a little bit of the jiu-jitsu aspect of it. Sure. And again, thank you for sharing that story. That's amazing. With the son, it does impact me. Personally, I don't have a son, but that's exactly what I would do. I only wish I had those accolades to be like, hey, son, check out what I did. I think that's the most badass thing ever, right?
But it's all relative. I think if you raise a kid, it really does give you the perspective of, I want to be a hero to my kids. I want to be, a guiding light and also, an enforcer of good morals and ethics and become a good person and understand how to contribute and be the best person you could be. And I think it's all relative. It's, I don't have to have, I am an unfulfilled combat sports athlete. I didn't accomplish all my goals. And I think that even the top level athletes of the Olympic champion on downs feel that in some way, shape, or form as well. So, you don't have to accomplish these amazing feats on the mat to be a hero in your kids' eyes. So I think that's like a misnomer. I don't even know if my daughter will ever really know, because she's only 5 now. She just turned 5, and I just want to be a good parent. My son, on the other hand, I want him to be, able to maybe follow a little bit in the footsteps of being on the mat. I don't care if has Olympic pursuits and dreams and goals in that way. I just want him to be able to understand boundaries and be someone who can defend themselves and have self-confidence because of the battles that you have to go through within the combat sports sphere, whether it's wrestling, judo, or jiu-jitsu. So, I just want to help him understand himself better while he's, has to go to battle a little bit. He's a soccer kid, a baseball kid, flag football. He does all the community-based sports, which I think is really good. And I didn't want to force him and pigeonhole him into something that he might resent me for in the future, where it's you're going to be on the mat every day. Sure. Where I just, my journey with my father, he had me and my brother doing that from a young age. I did have resentment towards that journey, that I was kind of I didn't have a choice. It was just what I had to do. And I found my love for it in different ways, winning being the main one, because I wanted to please my father and do the best I could just to gain his love. So it's a little different reasons. It wasn't as intrinsically motivated. It was a little bit I want to do it for others a little bit. So it wasn't till way later that I, once I retired and I had to look back and figure out where I could gain value from my journey. Because right when I finished judo, I was bussing tables. I was 28 and I'd been to 50 countries, but I really never had a job. So I really was in the back seat as far as being successful to be able to create an income to be able to provide for my then girlfriend and then our future family. So I was kind of lost. And, I don't want to get too much about it, but it wasn't until after that I was able to kind of expand my mind in a way that I saw where I had value in that. And some of it, I had some TBIs, I had some really bad neck injuries and head injuries where I hit my head really hard on the mat a bunch of times in the sport of judo. Because in judo, you learn how to fall. And then in competition, it's don't fall.
Yeah, right.
So I would land on my head and spin out. And I would, I had a lot of headbutts to my face. I lost my 2 front teeth in a match that I was wrestling at the University of Nebraska against the Minnesota wrestler. And I don't remember the match. Ooh. And I came out and I won the match without my 2 front teeth. And I don't remember it. And at the Olympic trials in 2004, I got thrown on my head and I was out and I herniated 2 discs in my neck. Right, yeah. And I came to and I was ready to compete. And the referee gave the win to the other athlete, Alex Attiano. And I don't even remember it. It's so I've had some of that trauma I've had to deal with. And it wasn't until later that I was able to kind of get solace from all of the kind of I had to let myself off the hook, as far as not be burdened by the guilt of having these shortcomings. So I think some of it what helped, and I'm not like a proponent of drug use, but was psilocybin. I kind of had a friend and a roommate up in the Bay Area where, I experimented with psilocybin maybe a dozen times in this window of my life when I was finished competing. And it really did give me a little bit of perspective, and like winning and losing is a little bit, hard to just place all the stock in.
Yeah.
And it really did help me let myself off the hook in a way where it was altering to my perception of truths. And it really did help. But, it's not something I abused in any way, shape, or form. It was something that I really do think was healing.
Yeah. Talking to you now, man, I mean, I could feel it. Like, you are a bare bones competitor, like true competitor to your nature. Because I think along comes with what comes with that. I know you have like no regrets. What's happened has happened. But then looking back at it, it's like, man, it's almost like I feel like you could have took that one back, right? I hear it in your voice. It's like,
totally.
Dang, like, yeah. But from someone just being a fan of combat sports, all combat sports, it's like, wow, you're just, from my subjective opinion, your accolades supersede, like, that's probably the last thing. I know it's goal driven. It's internally goal driven of what happened, with what happened in the trials and everything else, or how you weren't able to compete in the actual Olympics. But man, I mean, all the other stuff that you did is just phenomenal, in my eyes. But my point is that being a competitor, I can see how it kind of eats you a little bit. And you're like, man, I wish I could have that one back.
Yeah, it used to more. And it feels like a whole different life. I'm 45 now. And I feel like I gave it, literally my all. I gave my body to the sport. I'm walking around broken some days. But, I make do with what I have as far as, my physical, like who I am now. And I still, I'm able to train when I want to, and I'm able to teach and instruct and provide a living for my family. So I'm completely content and happy with what combat sports and grappling has given me. So, I don't walk around with that regret other than, a few matches and how I wish I would have treated my body. Because it was kind of like the dark ages of wrestling when I wrestled, where you would cut weight wrong, you would really fry your brain, you'd wear sauna suits, you would do all these things that now are kind of have been tried to be eliminated, where you have to do specific gravity of your urine and you have to do fat tests to make sure you can make a certain weight class. I was kind of in the era before that, where it was the dark ages where people were dying making weight.
Yeah, right.
So, and that's never really going to end completely, especially in like mixed martial arts and wrestling and judo. There's still abundant weight cutting.
They look like they're going to pass out in the press conference sometimes.
Oh yeah, no, it's bad, but it's always going to exist when you have weight classes. There's no way around it. So, but yeah, I wish I could have had a couple things back, but I'm content with who I am now and what I've kind of built. And I went to Panama to get stem cells maybe 3 months ago at Origins, which was a very amazing experience for 2 reasons. I had a week down there by myself to just be isolated in a way where I was able to kind of take a step back from what I've done and to kind of categorize what I want to do and how I want to pivot based on my current state of health in my body physically. I can't embark on all the battles that I was, just 6 months ago. I have to kind of be able to kind of like, I made a checklist of, pros and cons, and I took a step back and I saw, all these side quests that I'd been doing as a whole and what I'd kind of built, not just like follower counts or products I'm selling, but just the community of like-minded grapplers that I was able to kind of bring together within 3 different disciplines of martial arts: wrestling, judo, and jiu-jitsu, and even MMA. And I feel like I was able to kind of get my head around how I wanted to move forward as an instructor, as I want to move forward as like a brand, and what I wanted to kind of push forward as far as safety. So using all my experiences as a coach, athlete, instructor to kind of like push this ideology forward of, you know, the safe practice of takedowns and being able to use concepts from wrestling, judo, jiu-jitsu, MMA, and where those overlap on like a Venn diagram and what works for all of them. Yeah. So that's kind of like my plight and who I want to kind of like embody moving forward as an instructor and an instructor of coaches mostly. Like I kind of had a really important conversation about a year and a half ago with Mike Brown of ATT, yep, where I was in a side back room preceding, I think it was a UFC, it might have been a Bellator, they all kind of meld together, where he was coaching and I was coaching and we were in the same warm-up room. And I went up to him and I was like, hey man, you don't know me, but your life, your career kind of scares me. And I feel myself getting pulled into that direction where you're coaching 4 nights a week at a PFL, a Bellator, a UFC, a one championship, right, and that's taken over. Like you're following athletes around all over the world, and there's no time for like raising a family. And I had 2 kids, and it's just like I felt that pull. I think at that time I was coaching 20 professional fighters, and it was like just something that was really kind of like spreading myself too thin. I don't have enough bandwidth for that as far as, you know, doing just that could be its own job. And I had other jobs too. And I really had to scale that back based on the conversation I had with him. And he told me something I'll never forget. And that's something that I've really kind of structured my present life around, is he said, well, so you're a coach or an instructor? And I'm like, I think I'm both. He's like, well, those 2 things are separate. You don't have to be a coach and an instructor. Those are 2 different jobs. If you want to be the best teacher and instructor, focus on that. If you want to be the best coach, that's a different thing. And I'd had those conflated until that moment a little bit, where, you know, I'm teaching, I'm coaching, I'm doing both. I'm working with athletes, I'm working on their headspace. I'm trying to, you know, be an emotional support animal for some of these athletes because they need that, and they need me there with them in Vegas. They need them there with me all over the place. And I don't have the bandwidth for that. So it really did make me take a step back and really see like, okay, I could just be the best instructor I could be presently, rather than have to like cater to athletes. And I love athletes. That's the most, I think, the endeavor that really does personify the truest goals to like the virtuous winning and like all of the ideals as an athlete to be the best you can be. That's my favorite journey and pursuit. But as an adult, a father of 2, you're just raising other people's kids at that point.
Sure. Yeah.
So I really did like kind of pivot. I think the last time I cornered was 2 years ago. It was 2 fights on the same night. It was the last Bellator event. I cornered Kat Zingano and Liz Carmouche in 2 title bouts. And I remember thinking, I was like, you know what? I just don't think it's for me anymore. It was just a lot of like emotional energy and, you know, the camps leading up to it and everything around it, which I do think it's an awesome goal and endeavor for athletes to do that. And I love being a part of that. It's just maybe at some other point in my life when my kids are a little older, I'll go back into that. But now, you know, I'm more of like a tactical advisor or a technical advisor to athletes that come here. I don't go out and really travel to athletes anymore. I'll do seminars for like, you know, a 2.5 hour stint in different locations, and I'll usually bring my family with me. So I'm able to kind of do right by my family and still provide for them in a way where I'm getting out there and I'm teaching rather than coaching.
Yeah, because coaching, you know, that reminds me, you bring up a good point. Not only are you their coach, you're their bartender, you're their therapist, you're their...
I'm holding a bucket.
Yeah.
I'm helping with their weight cut.
Right.
I'm,
emotionally you got to be there after losses and wins and losses, even with the wins, right? Like, that's time within itself. That's time allotted.
But, the highest highs and the lowest lows are in that seat as a coach too. So, you really do live and die by their results.
Absolutely.
And it's a hard one sometimes. I was there for Ronda's fights against Holly Holm and Amanda Nunes, and I've been there for a lot of other fights that were really lows, and I've been there for the highs of other ones. So it's the balancing act between those, and getting back on the horse and anteing back up and doing the things you can for your athletes. And at this stage of my life, I just think it's best to work with instructors and students that want to learn from me in a way that's kind of the most convenient for me right now. And, nothing against athletes of the highest ilk, but it's just a lot easier. And I have between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Monday through Friday to work. Sure. The rest of the time is dedicated to my family. So, I drop them off at school. I pick them up. My wife has kind of a 9 to 5. So a lot of that's left on me in the evening times before she comes home from work. So I'm driving him to soccer, baseball, flag football, gymnastics. So there's a lot of hats I have to wear, after my workday, which is a pretty short workday. So I teach privates, I create content, I try and teach teachers I have Zoom meetings with instructors that are part of my affiliation. Where I have a JFlow network of affiliate instructors now that have, I think, 22 of them at this point.
That's amazing.
I had 93 applicants around the world that want to be part of this, but I have to do level 1 certification, and we do a lot of that, where they fly here, or I'm going up to Seattle this weekend to Gentle Giant, where I'm going to do an instructor affiliation level 1 certifying test. So I'm trying to build where I can teach teachers my concepts of the safe application of takedowns and how that seamlessly integrates into jiu-jitsu. No-gi and gi jiu-jitsu. So I do feel like this is my best niche where I want to help jiu-jitsu become a little bit more well-rounded. I'm not just speaking, about every gym needs to learn break falls and takedowns, but the ones that are really interested in filling in some holes, that's where I feel like I'm making my mark.
Right, exactly. And we're going to get right into that because I have a lot of questions about that as well, how you integrate jiu-jitsu and, the cliche, the butt scooter kind of thing. Yeah. And I kind of know where we're going with that. But then I guess, a lot of people, obviously, with the Ronda Rousey whole bit, I think that's interesting to most people. Obviously, she was a big name. I mean, that's an understatement. First of all, I want to take it back to how did that even come about? Did she sought after you, or then did you message her? How did that all come about?
Yeah, so I've known Rhonda since she was a kid. So my dad's actually her godfather. So she grew up on our couch most summers, where our judo club's just 10 minutes from here, Sanchi Judo Dojo.
In San Diego, okay.
Yeah, so her mom would send her on a train or a bus from Los Angeles down here.
Oh, wow.
And she would live with us for weeks on end, sporadically. And then my brother and myself would train with her all the time as a kid. And then as she grew up into the junior ranking system, she was the #1 senior at a young age. So when she was 15 or 16, she would be going on international trips where I was there. So I would be her big brother on these trips where she was a minor, going out to, international events around the world where I would look after a lot of these trips because it could get scary in Eastern Europe or South America or wherever we were. So, the World Championships in Cairo, Egypt, or we would be in Europe or South America. So I had a really close connection with her. We would warm up together at events and train together and cut weight together all the time. So I really have known Rhonda a long time. And when I finished competing, she took a year and a half, 2 years off and, kind of had a similar background as I did as far as, she started bartending and kind of was a little bit maybe lost. And she had always told me and my brother that she wanted to be an MMA fighter at the end of her judo career.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So my brother has this good clip where he was filming her talking about it. I think this is in 2008, where she was talking about how she was going to be the UFC champion. And it's funny. It's like she was prophetic in her statements.
Yeah.
And she started fighting, and her first like 4 or 5 fights, I was living in Philadelphia, and she was training and competing already in MMA, but at like a little bit lower of a level. And then she got into Strikeforce, and I went to a few of her fights at Strikeforce, where she, you know, got me and my brother good seats, and we would watch her. And then once she got into the UFC, she called me, or we were talking. I forgot exactly how it happened. And my wife was getting a job out here in Oceanside, California, where we ended up moving. And it was just like the stars had kind of aligned, where we were moving out here already. And we talked about it, and she's like, Justin, I want you to be one of my grappling coaches for like no-gi judo. And most of it, honestly, because she understood me and she knew that like my psyche about all of this, and she valued, when no one really did, to be honest, what I knew and my experience in this space. Because at that point, I was just kind of a failed judoka and wrestler. And she's like, you have a lot to offer, Justin. You should really be positive about who you are and what you could do for me. And I'm really thankful for what she offered me as far as being like involved in that whole run to the top. Because I saw it from when she was like, no one knew who she was as a judoka, and then she started getting more traction, and then where it was basically like she had the presidential motorcade surrounding her at UFC warm-ups. Yeah. So it was like that ascension was just mind-blowing. So I was with her on these like 6 UFC events in her corner, where she was just like a rock star.
Just wrecking people.
It was crazy.
Yeah.
So it was a really cool time, and I am thankful for what she was able to kind of like pull me back in, and it really did dictate what I do now. Because from there, I was kind of branding. I was a graphic designer after a couple of years out of judo, and I was really good at drawing, and I learned how to use those skills as far as like on Adobe platforms. So I was creating logos and t-shirts and rash guards and branding assets for a bunch of companies, and a bunch of them were for Rhonda, for Henner and Huron Gracie, Mike Dolce, so all of the coaches within the sphere of her camp. And then one day her mom came up to me and was like, Justin, all these people are wearing their own brands, and they have their own podcasts and their own websites, and they're all like bigger than themselves because they have a brand. Why don't you do that? And I'm like, well, I'm just here for Rhonda, and that's cringy. And, I'm from the old school kind of judo mentality, where someone will yell your name because you deserve it, and someone will hear it, and that'll bolster your amplified name out there, rather than yelling from a mountaintop your own name. So it was like something that I really didn't feel comfortable doing. And then, I was Henner and Huron Gracie's roommate for about 4 different trips through Rhonda's fights. Because one fight it would be Henner, another fight it would be Huron, and they balanced. So it'd be like in Vegas, it would be Henner, and then in Rio de Janeiro it would be Huron. And we did this thing where I would be their roommates for those like 2 weeks before Rhonda would have a fight. So I'd learned a ton from Henner and Huron, and I designed some of their logos, and we would talk, and they were wearing so many hats as far as like doing Zoom meetings, seminars, privates, doing calls about, consulting to different law enforcements and all these things that was just around like pushing their brand. And then Mike Dolce as well. When we were there, we would go on a podcast, on the Mike Dolce podcast, and all these things where I was just learning how to maybe create my own brand. Right. And it didn't really hit me on the head till Rhonda's mom was like, why don't you do this? So it took a while. And then I started to kind of conceive my own platform, my own website, where I could have the instructionals and an e-newsletter and an Instagram and products on my shop and all these things that kind of can like push what I'm doing forward without me, just teaching a private. Yeah. So, it did like
scaling it
yeah. For sure. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty thankful towards, Rhonda and her mom for that, because they kind of were able to kind of see what I was doing and that there's potential in other ways. And then, I might not be as salesy as maybe Henner and Huron, but I respect what they're doing. And
they're marketing geniuses.
Yeah. So I saw what they were doing firsthand, where I was their roommates literally for weeks on end. So it did help in my like conceiving what I'm doing.
Yeah, I'm really fascinated with that, as you know, that I'm pretty much branding myself as well, just like you. I think just like everyone in the beginning, right? It's kind of cringy to do. We're not used to it. I'm 40, you're 45. Like we come from an age to where I think we were even just living without smartphones, right? I had a great childhood without it. But before we get into that, more about Rhonda, because I'm sure the people want to know with that whole thing where she was just wrecking people, and I know I know you're close to her, and can you speak a little bit about with the Holly Holmes? You talked about it briefly, and she was on this highest of the high, because for me it's so like it'll be unbelievable for me to hear that story arc of where did it all go, I guess you could say, wrong maybe, or like how did that transition from being on a 5-6 fight winning streak, and then all of a sudden, which eventually led to, I guess you could say, a quote unquote like downfall.
It's hard to just put into words because there was a lot of factors that went into her run in Ascension and then her last 2 fights, and she was a world beater. She was able to to take the skills she learned in Judo and adapt them to MMA at a time where no one possessed those unique skills.
She showcased it in front of everyone.
Yeah, so she had accomplished so much, and I think she was on that path where the momentum of her previous wins were propelling her into her future. And she had been in 3 movies. She was a brand ambassador for a lot of companies. She was flying all over the world to push out her kind of what she was doing in a way where, fatigue, in a way where she was fighting 4 times in a year. What other champs were fighting 4 times a year?
Yeah.
So, there was a lot of things that could be said about how she went about her last 2 fights, that the contributing factors to why she lost, it was almost like you could put in all these different factors together and that outputs the reason why. I really do wish she would have had performances that she won on those last 2 fights, obviously. But there was a lot of new things that were happening within her, stardom that could have contributed to that. It's just her weight cut was not great in her the Holly Holm fight. I'm not trying to make excuses for her, but Holly Holm was a great fighter, and her style, I think, was able to kind of like mesh in a way that she was able to find ways to get successful outcomes. So I think that was a big part of it. She was a taller fighter, rangy. She used like movement a little bit different than most people who kind of like came forward. Her movement away and finding angles and moving and kind of like making Rhonda chase her kind of was like a little bit much maybe. But, outside of just the fight itself, I think it was just a hard matchup,
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of pressures that she was having to wear, being, an unbeatable wrecking force that is someone that is larger than life. So, yeah, I think that was one of those 2.
Yeah, 2 things to that. I mean, you're right. Number one, Holly Holmes was world class, right? Still is. And what I wanted to point that out when you said, she was doing movies, it was kind of like, do you think it was kind of like that Marvin Hagler kind of quote where it's hard to get up when you're sleeping in silk sheets, kind of, because she had been in all these movies, and that is Conor McGregor, right? I mean, when you make it there, it's kind of hard to not put in the work. And, she's world class as well. I'm sure she was putting in the work, but then maybe ramped it down a little bit. Do you think that had a little bit of effect, the fame, and like she was on this, competency, I guess?
Yeah.
For being...
That's hard to say. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just hard to say.
I understand, yeah.
She still had that dog in her. I know that.
Sure.
I think some of the contributing factors was maybe, and I'm not throwing shade. It's just her striking coach, Edmond was pretty.
Joe Rogan's talked about this.
He had one way of seeing things, and his personality is pretty verbose in a way where I'm trying to put this in a way that, it's hard to put what Edmond was doing into words, because a lot of times he was pretty overwhelming as far as like his coaching tactics, in a way where you could pick that apart in a million ways and see and poke holes in it, where he got really emotional and involved and invested in areas of Ronda's game that isn't what made her the best.
She had no business being a part of. Yeah.
So, my interjections met deaf ears a lot of times. So it was like something that I really regret and wish that I stood a little bit more firm. But I did make those comments, and I did talk to both Rhonda and Edmond about it. And when things are going really well, it's hard for them to see that, maybe, because,
Right. Because you're highest of the high.
Yeah.
It's almost like your forebrain shut down, right? Because you're emotionally on this high.
Yeah.
And then it's like you could accomplish anything pretty much at this point, but we're at the highest of the high level, like
Totally.
Joe Rogan said. It's like, dude.
Totally. And I did go to them after the loss and talk about this, and if things could be different and there could be, let's lean into her strengths. I know we got to fill in some holes, but like, she's a judoka. Let's utilize that skill set and get more reps in to where we could find more ways to use her skill set. Changing levels, being able to penetrate in, do things from different angles. I mean, I had a whole idea of how to make that happen, and it just fell on deaf ears. So, I mean, I ended up being used a lot less in her last fight, because, it just was something that I think Edmond saw, that I was a little bit more contentious, and I was starting to see like how his ego and how his coaching style was just something that, wasn't helping. And, I do have regrets in that realm where I probably should have just like opted out, but I wanted to be there for Rhonda to make sure she was safe. And I feel like a lot of times I failed, because I had known her the longest, and I had been with her in her journeys that made her who she was. And it's something that I kind of look back on, and I'm like, man, I think I could have helped make that be a little bit different. But she's let me know that no, she doesn't put any of that on me, and I shouldn't put any of that on myself. But as a coach, training partner, friend, confidant, I feel like I could have. But things happen for a reason. And I know it's easy to say that now, 10 years later. But I'm just kind of like, I look back and I'm like, well, I think as far as like making a judoka a striker is something that, should be like a second skill set rather than what you lead with. As like far as a lifelong grappler. Like, sure, you fall in love with striking as a grappler, but, utilize those skills as a complementary asset, not the end all be all.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And a lot of fighters talk about that. I mean, it takes a lifetime to learn each discipline. Like striking is striking
totally
in itself. I mean, there's people that are masters in that, right?
Yeah, and I think Rhonda's a way better striker today than she was back then. Sure. And now she's working with a good friend of mine, AJ Matthews, just to like get reps in MMA and enjoy life. Yeah. And I introduced them maybe, I don't know, a little less than a year ago. And I just, want to see her, have a good time and touch base with her, combat sports roots and to have fun with it. So I've known AJ for almost a decade now. He lives here in Carlsbad.
I'm doing a podcast with him after this.
Awesome. No, I'm stoked about that, and he's a great coach. I mentioned to Rhonda, if I had any choice of any striking coach, it would be him.
Yeah.
So I've known him for a long time. I actually helped coach him when he was competing and fighting down at Alliance MMA when I was a coach down there. And just a very open-minded human.
Yeah, very, very fascinating. I think most people, when they appreciate the insights, especially coming from who's ever in, because, people will make narratives and all that. I just wanted to make it clear of what happened. And, about the coaching thing, I wanted to bring it up because, I did a podcast with John Wood, who's the owner of Syndicate MMA. Would you say that Edmond, and I don't know who he is, I'm sure he's a really good guy, but would you say that he made it more about himself, or was he just coaching? Because why I bring up John Wood was he said some coaches are about themselves, right? It's not even, it is about the fighter, but then they make it like about themselves. That seems like, and no shade to this guy, obviously I don't know, Surreal Olympic coach as well, but then he seems to be always on the spotlight. Like, it's like, okay, who's running the show? Like, would you say that is accurate, or it's just his coaching style?
I think, part of who he is, very passionate about what he does. And he lets his personality and that emotion kind of dictate how he coaches a little bit, maybe too much sometimes. Sometimes it's important to have some restraint and to understand some core principles and philosophies about coaching someone, that you're trying to make them the best they can be. And it's about seeing their best attributes and helping get them to the place that they could reach based on who they are, not on what you want to force them to do because of that's kind of how you envision fighting or your skill sets. You want to have athletes reach their potential because of who they are.
Right.
And sometimes I think that got lost. I think he had his playbook as far as what he wanted to push into Ronda's training in a way that, kind of personified his personality. And sometimes it was about him a lot. And,
Tends to happen.
Yeah, it tends to happen.
Notice a pattern,
Yeah. And, I'm not saying everything was all bad.
Yeah.
Like Edmond, being a coach of such a high-level athlete and fighter, it took around-the-clock tender loving care. And he was involved in all facets of Rhonda's life. And I know Rhonda's even talked about it, and it was a little overwhelming sometimes where it was just too much as far as, his involvement in areas of her life that were just like, this is private, this is personal. Like, we need to draw a line. And that's something else, that as a coach, I understand completely. You got to stay in your lane.
Yes.
And, I've heard Edmond say some things that were kind of crazy sometimes. He was like that he could beat Jose Aldo or beat Conor McGregor. And it was like, I don't know if he was joking, but he seemed pretty serious.
That kind of shows, that's why I asked, because that kind of, there's no explanation needed there. If he was getting serious, but I wanted to talk to you, and I think this was interesting that what you brought up on another podcast is that, and it stuck with me last night when I was researching it. You said that BJJ was just a rebrand of Judo, right? Can you go more into that? Because getting more context, I could kind of see where that's going, but not completely.
Sure.
So can you add more context to that?
Sure. I mean, I won't get too into the history.
Sure.
But as far as being on,
just the technical aspects and how they all kind of coincide with each other.
Sure. Yeah. Being on the same branch of the same tree. I would say Judo, the philosophies of takedowns in a gi and submissions and guard passing and pinning are all in Judo. And I think it hasn't been till, the International Judo Federation has kind of stripped away a lot of those aspects to sportify a martial art. So it's a little bit more palatable for competition and spectators to make it more high pace. That is why Judo has kind of moved away from being more of a fight in a way where it's useful in fights. Sure, the throwing aspect and choking aspect and armbar aspect, but the exchanges where you could go for a throw and concede your back and wait till the referee stands you up, all those kind of like make it different than jiu-jitsu, where jiu-jitsu is like the long form conversation of these exchanges, where in judo it's a little bit of a short duration. So like the goals are very similar in judo as they are in jiu-jitsu, where you want to take them down, you know, submit your opponent or pin your opponent by passing the guard and being in, you know, mount, or that's tate shihogatami, or side control, which is yoko shihogatami. So all these moves have been around for a century or more within the sphere of judo, that all, you know, have within the last 40 years or so become popularized within jiu-jitsu. So, you know, judo, Maeda, going to Brazil and utilizing the sport or the martial art of judo, which he learned from Jigoro Kano, he was able to spread that within Brazil in the Gracie family and be able to kind of like teach them the concepts that they turned into jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu specifically. So it became like this thing that kind of shifted from the centric of the core competency of being better on your feet to being better on the ground. So, which both are true in judo. You know, you get a lot of specialists that are really good on the ground, but the modern goals for judo athletes that are in the combat sport of judo and the Olympic goals is to be as good as you can at throwing people, and then the groundwork is more of an afterthought. So I think the way judo has evolved has made it less like jiu-jitsu, but where they started, and you know, I would say probably the 1940s and 50s, they were basically the same thing, where you had like Kosen judo, where, you know, all of these guards, De La Hiva and Ashigarami, and these techniques that have been kind of rebranded within the sphere of modern Brazilian jiu-jitsu, all existed in judo.
Right.
So, you know, there's nothing really new under the sun. So, but the way that, you know, marketing and branding has pushed jiu-jitsu to be on every street corner here in Southern California, and whereas judo's more of like has a different model of like, it's more community based, it's in Japanese cultural centers or community centers, and it's not as much of a money-making endeavor. It's harder to spread that within the US, whereas in the world, judo's much bigger than jiu-jitsu, much bigger. It's like the second largest sport in the world by active countries.
Right.
Whereas jiu-jitsu is like a handful of countries practice and have some jiu-jitsu academies in their country. So I feel like here in the US, there's a little bit of a misunderstanding of where jiu-jitsu got most of their moves and movements from. So, you know, I'm a judoka who was pretty good at wrestling, who loves jiu-jitsu. So I understand the historical,
great way to put it.
the historical relevance of where these moves and movements came from and the origination of these martial art disciplines. So I love jiu-jitsu. I think I'm going to train that the longest, just because I'm going to be able to facilitate movements and moves with my body.
Sustainable.
Yeah, it's more sustainable of a martial arts discipline. But I do understand the relevance of where these, you know, disciplines came from. And I think, you know, jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, owes judo a lot as far as, you know, how they were able to kind of extrapolate their new branch of the same tree off of, you know, the backs of decades of judo martial arts discipline athletes and sensei and practitioners. So, yeah.
Yeah, so leading into that, that's perfect segue to go into how, you know, you were wearing a white belt, and then your instructor gave you your brown belt, which you were white belt because you felt like you didn't deserve it, or was that the...
I'll go through this really quick. So in 2016...
Also, and can you please talk about a little bit of, you know, your style? Because what I got the sense from the research that I did, that since you were a go in like judo, you had, I guess, a hard time when you get put into bad spots. Correct me if I'm wrong. But then, you know, you were maybe, what I took out of it was you were more of an offensive player, and then you had a hard time getting into those like bad positions.
Yeah. So I think in 2016, I started kind of really like pursuing my ranking in jiu-jitsu. And it was kind of by happenstance where I was teaching judo class at Studio 540 at noon. And then I think one day I heard Fabio Santos. He's like one of the pioneers here in San Diego of BJJ. He started teaching at Studio 540. His gym has been around for over 30 years in San Diego. So he was going to teach 1 or 2 days a week at Studio 540 in the hour preceding my judo class. So I got there early and I was going to wear my white belt just because, I respect him too much to just wear my judo gi and belt.
Right.
Even though for, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years, I'd go to open mat and all the people at Studio 540 would be like, just wear your judo gi and belt. It's fine. You're like really good. It's cool. And I'd be like, okay. And it was always just open mat, so I went and I wore my white belt. And then class happened, we rolled, and then after the class, Fabio Santos gave me my purple belt. And then we talked a little bit, and he's like, well, I have a gym maybe 20 minutes from here, maybe you should come. And so I started going 1 day a week, every Monday. And maybe 2 months later, he gave me my brown belt. So within a few months, I was a brown belt. And for the next 2 years, I would go on Mondays and I would train and I would really try my hardest in front of him to choke and armbar and pin and pass guards and take backs and do all my judo and wrestling skills to do my best. And one day, he saw me tapping out all of his black belts all the time. And one day I asked him, I'm like, so what do I need to do? Not to earn my black belt, but to just improve. And he said something to me I'll never forget. He's like, you need to get out of position. You need to concede in a way where you have to work from being mounted, from giving up your back, from being in positions where you're nearly submitted. And, the way he said it was pretty concise in a way where I was like, oh, okay. Like I'm kind of a goer. I want to be as efficient and as quick as I can to the sub. Rather than, let's find a way into bad positions against people who are bigger and stronger and have more jiu-jitsu experience than me. So, I'd kind of do my best job at acting the first 15 or 20 seconds of every round, and I would give up position.
Right.
I wouldn't just start, okay, mount me, let's go.
Yeah.
And I would work from there, and it didn't feel good because a lot of times it'd be mounted with shoulder pressure.
Right,
and then all these positions where I'm getting choked on the face or these positions where it's like it doesn't feel good to that's why I was really kind of not wanting to go in these positions in the first place because I have a hurt neck, knees, shoulders. So it's like putting myself in positions where I can't protect myself as well.
Yeah.
So I really did have to learn, these just primitive ways of getting out of positions that were difficult. And in wrestling and judo, you learn how to escape, but it's just not as nuanced with the gi in a way where, you have to really take one thing at a time. And I did learn a ton. And I'm glad I did because, one of my big inspirations in that regard was watching Jeff Glover, where he would concede position so much. And I was really good at doing that in wrestling, to keep these scrambles where someone would get in deep on something in me and I could almost re-attack from there and defend and keep this thing going until I ended up on top. And I kind of liken it and relate it to that. And I'd watch Jeff Glover train or compete, and it was very similar. So I'd be able to almost, instead of like I'm caught in a hurricane, and instead of trying to bail and get out of it, I would go towards the eye of the storm.
Right.
And that was kind of how I thought of it, where, instead of defending in this way, I'll go with it in a way where it's easier that direction and just kind of try and flow with things in a way where it kept the energy moving rather than a static push versus push, where there's a lot more impetus and impact on your body. So I kind of really did get an understanding of how to go with things and go with the flow a little bit in a way where it worked better for jiu-jitsu scrambles and gi movement, where, even Fabio was like, you just are moving the whole round. Why don't you just get on top and hold people? And I'm like, that's a lot of work. I'd rather like go with what they give me and find the sub in that transition. But yeah, so once I kind of was able to get that understand it better, to get out and be able to defend and counter people from positions where I wasn't used to getting to, it wasn't long before he gave me my black belt. So I think it was just a little over 3 years. So I think I started my jiu-jitsu journey because I wanted to be a better MMA coach. I wanted to be able to be like someone for athletes that they could ask me questions as a coach in all sphere of grappling, whether it's standing or on the ground. And I had a very limited view of that from my judo experience and wrestling experience, in a way where, you know, folk style wrestling is a great skill to have in MMA. It's how to get up from the bottom, how to keep people down on top, and all the different movements and moves to do both. And judo has arm bars and chokes. So I had a good subsection built out, but I really do think it kind of was a tip of my cap to get that last kind of straw for my jiu-jitsu black belts. And I think I fell in love with it during the period of time that I trained it in a hard way. To just to be a better coach is why I trained it. I wanted to actually be a better coach for Ronda, for Dominic Cruz, for all these athletes that I was working with, Darian Caldwell, these world champ fighters. So it really did help me along my journey.
So let's talk a little bit about, okay, so let's go ahead and, land this plane. What advice would you give? I mean, this is, just talking to you, is the highest of the high. Division one wrestler, got to coach in the Olympics, coached the highest levels of athletes, Ronda Rousey, Dominic Cruz, Kat Zingano. What advice would you give looking back, just briefly, to your old self for upcoming high-level competitors that are going to take the kind of path you're taking? And Vinny Magdalez, as I mentioned before, that high-level resume of just like, from 8 to, because I know some of those guys, these guys are starting young. Yeah. I mean, really young. One of them, shout out Jackson Glass from Texas. I mean,
I know Jackson. I've trained with Jackson. He's awesome.
I mean, when he pours it on. But he started training jiu-jitsu at 3. What advice would you give to these up-and-comers, to maybe get your mind straight, maybe in more of a mentality aspect and not just a physical aspect, go, go, go? How do you keep yourself level-headed and not get yourself, like you said, jumping off a cliff, and just doing the right things, leading by example?
Yeah, there's a couple, even some cliches I could think of that really do ring true. I would say one that's helped me in my, latter years subsequent to being an athlete would be like, the glory's in the journey, not the destination. Like, be able to take things in stride and don't take yourself too serious. Like, we're here for a finite amount of time. We're floating on a mote of dust in the cosmos. Like, it's almost insignificant. So if you put so much pressure on yourself, you're really not going to be your best self unless you're able to kind of release that gas and like take a step back every once in a while and see what you've accomplished. Because it is important to have that dedicated, disciplined approach where you do the work to get to where you need to get to. But every so often, it's important to take a step back and see what you've done and how far you've come. So being able to let yourself off the hook for some of the failures and learn from those is really important. I was really hard on myself for a lot of the things that happened in my journey. So I think, making sure that you have a sense of yourself off of the mat as well as on the mat, being well balanced, not just being like, my whole personality and my whole sense of self is dedicated to the wins and losses that happen.
Yeah, make it your identity, right? Or you making it your identity, which isn't you as a person.
But I do think, you do have to have some of that ego when you're a young athlete that's going to help propel you. But I think it needs to be a balancing act. Yeah. It's important to get well-rounded, do things off the mat that help you become a better human. A lot of the philosophies and concepts you learn on the mat do help you off the mat. But I think, sometimes it's important to develop skills and become educated off the mat and have that as like a resource you could also utilize after your time as a competitor is over. So I think that does help a lot.
Very good. Justin JFlow Flores, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for your time. Man, you're a great storyteller.
Thank you so
You
much,
really
man.
are.
Thank
I
you.
know it's based on experience, but man, it was very, very captivating. So, but again, thank you for your time. Thank you for having me at your beautiful gym. And what do we have over there?
Oh yeah, shameless plug. For mostly gym owners and instructors, just some dangerous techniques that I think are important to you want to establish like a safe environment to foster growth on the mat as a jiu-jitsu academy. I think sometimes injuries can be avoided, especially if you kind of understand where they come from. And these dangerous band moves, or as far as like I'm concerned, you should leave on the cutting room floors of your academies, at least at the first formative and intermediate ages of your athletes. When they get better and they see these moves exist, okay, practice them in maybe a safe way. But I think it's important to note that a lot of injuries can be mitigated. And a lot of us people that train, we don't have the fortitude to just take 6 months dealing with an ACL tear because we have a family and we have to do our work. And that's really hard and difficult when we're laid up in a hospital. So I think that's important because I have really bad knees. I've had, almost 20 knee surgeries over the years. I've had 6 ACL tears. I have kind of had to like limp through my grappling existence. And I also created knee pads. So I have these knee pads I sell on my website in both white and black. And they are kind of a adapted version of like a volleyball and grappling knee pad. I have both in white and black. I'm getting 3 other colorways. I'm getting pink, I'm getting a tan skin color, and a gray color. So make sure to just check them out. If you're interested, I have rash guards, shirts, shorts, some other products on there if you're interested at the shop on my website. And also if you guys are interested in my teaching style, I have a series of instructionals on my platform, jflowacademy.com, where you could kind of tap into different resources, whether it's gi, no gi, jiu-jitsu, judo, wrestling, MMA, grappling, and all different kind of series of techniques that I teach to my athletes and that I've used within my competition life. So if you're interested, check it out. It was great to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you.